there's a house in Bothell, Washington. A nice place. Detached, modern, spacious. A 2-car garage, a tidy front lawn. The kind of home you feel safe and secure in until you're not. Because this house, nestled in a quiet cul-de-sac, became a place of paranormal chaos. The activity inside became so extreme, so relentless, that it drew in tech experts, religious leaders, and a controversial visit from the TV show Ghost Adventures. I've spoken to paranormal investigators involved in these events, and they've called this case one of the most well-documented poltergeists on record. This episode you're about to watch is based on video and audio diaries, pictures, testimonies from witnesses, and insights from the paranormal researchers involved, all compiled in the book The Bothell Hell House by Keith Linder. I've been in close contact with Keith as I put this video together, and I'm grateful for him for providing a wealth of material, including photographs and video from the house, which I'll share with you tonight. So just get ready for a series of events that will chill you, because I'm Peter Laws, and tonight we walk into the fog to explore the terrifying story of the Bothell Hell House. Keith Linder and his girlfriend Tina were a happy couple. Keith worked in IT, Tina in healthcare, and together they shared a strong relationship built on laughter, love, and a dream of a shared future. And so, after 2 years of dating together, they decided it was time to move in together, and they started to look for a place to live. They both were already well paid in their jobs, but Keith had just received a significant pay increase from a new role, which meant they were able to find an impressive rental home in Bothell, Washington. Built in 2005, the couple fell in love with the 5-bedroomed home, and it was in May of 2012 when they moved in. They found a bottle of wine left for them by the homeowner, and excited, they poured a glass, and the two of them sat in the new living room discussing how they might decorate and furnish the new house. The strange activity began almost immediately. You see, as they were in that living room, just chatting about their new home, they heard a sound that would frankly be the last thing you would expect to hear in your new empty home. They heard a cough. A child's cough. And as soon as that distinct sound filled the air, they looked at one another and said, was that a kid's cough? Now, the cough had come from upstairs in the house, but they knew for a fact that the place was empty. And so they decided it's just one of those things, a new house with its own quirky noises, because after all, it couldn't possibly be what it sounded like. So they shrugged it off. Well, a few days later, they began the substantial work of bringing all of their belongings into the new house. Doing that always makes a place feel more like home, doesn't it? Only in this house, the things they brought didn't seem to stick around. You see, they'd been in the house for just over a week when they began to find some of their belongings had gone missing. It was little things at first, and if you're anything like me, you would just say, well, that always happens in a house move. Things go missing. I once had a bunch of horror movie soundtracks on vinyl, some of them quite rare, that got lost in a house move. Oh man, I was gutted. But these things in Keith and Tina's house were different. Like an extra key fob that Keith kept locked away in a glove box in the car. The movers didn't even touch that, but that was missing. Tina was finding her jewelry, which seemed to be vanishing too. Where could it be? Well, despite the oddness of that, they decided to put it down to the moving process after all. This is the car that had the missing fob. At one point, it started flashing its lights and horn for no reason. Keith caught it on video. Watch.
Come here. It's doing it now. It's doing it. Oh my freaking God, dude. What the heck is going on?
After watching the car for a while, Keith decides to go back into the house. But as soon as he turns to go inside, the horn begins beeping. When he walks to the car to investigate, the horn stops. And when he walks away from the car, the horn begins again. This issue with the car lights and car horn continues on and off for a few hours. But then more things happened that were far, far weirder. They would wake up from a night's sleep and head down to the kitchen to make coffee. And when they went there, they would find children's toys spread everywhere. Now you have to appreciate how crazy this is, because they didn't have kids. Later on, they would learn the word apport, which is a very freaky feature of some poltergeist cases, where rather than objects just going missing, they will appear, and sometimes they are unknown objects to the experiencers. Well, if that wasn't weird enough, they would also walk into the kitchen and find every single kitchen cupboard gaping open. And of course, their first thought was that they had an intruder that had gotten into the house, which is shocking and kind of depressing if you think about it, if it's in your new home. But things became more strange when they would wake up and find those toys strewn not only on the floor, but on the staircase all the way up to their bedroom door. Well, this was already getting too much, and so Keith decided to have a security system installed. He didn't skimp either. Every door and every window of the house was armed 24/7 with motion detectors. But if they thought these gadgets would catch a real-life burglar or prowler, they were wrong. One night, Tina and Keith were kicking back watching one of Keith's favorite TV shows, the classic 70s James Garner show, The Rockford Files.
Tonight on Classic, Jim Rockford meets an old friend accused of murder. The Rockford Files up next.
Now, some of you will find what I'm about to tell you ridiculous. But for those of you out there who have experienced hauntings and poltergeists, you will know how serious and unfunny this sort of stuff is. You see, as they were watching the show, they spotted a movement near the TV. They had a plant in a pot. And as they looked in slack-jawed disbelief, they saw the plant rise up a few inches from the ground, then go into a complete spin, and it dropped back down on the floor, lying on the ground. Please appreciate how insane that is to witness. Keith and Tina looked at one another, their faces saying it all, like, did you just see that? Did that really just happen? Now, as you'll learn, Keith is a bit of a tech head, a gadget guy, and so he immediately thought that they didn't have a ghost, but rather they had just witnessed an incredible and elaborate prank. Surely there was somebody. How and why, he had no idea, but somebody had rigged up strings or a remote control device. Hey, maybe they were part of a hidden prank show or something, and someone was going to burst in with a camera at any minute. But he and Tina leapt off the couch and started examining the plant. They even tried to reenact what they had just seen. There were no strings, no cords, no wire, nothing. And it was then that they both began to realize that either this prank was so clever that the mechanics of it were hidden, or that they had just witnessed a supernatural occurrence. And so they wondered, surely this is connected to the missing objects, the scattered toys, the kid's cough at the start of this. Was their new home haunted by the spirit of a dead child? Well, the plant pot in the living room was only the start of it, because not long after that, Keith and Tina were having dinner in the kitchen when another flower pot literally went whizzing through the air past them, and it smashed into pieces against the wall. Then, at another time, Keith was watching TV upstairs when he suddenly heard an absolutely massive series of bangs. These bangs shook the walls of the house. Tina was downstairs at the time cooking, and she, too, came running out of the kitchen at the sound of this cacophony. Where did the bangs come from? The wall, the floor, the furniture? Well, Keith told me something quite interesting. He phrased it like this. He said, they came from everywhere and nowhere. He said that him and Tina would be in various parts of the house when the sound occurred, and no matter where they were, it would always feel like it was coming from the room next to them. Tina would think it originated close to her. He would think it originated close to him. He put it this way. It's one of the most insane things we experienced. And yet they were to experience far more than just banging. You see, by 2012, they were seeing the house lights turning on and off by themselves, and they informed the landlord, who sent out an electrician. But these professionals couldn't figure out a root cause. It was during one of those light problems that Keith first saw an apparition in the house. It was in the evening, and Tina was taking a bubble bath in their master bedroom. Meanwhile, Keith was working on his computer in his home office. He was downloading some music when the office light suddenly winked out. This wasn't a power cut, because as Keith sat at his computer desk, suddenly in darkness, he actually heard the click of the light switch. And as he started to turn around, he could see the glow from the light from the hallway spilling into the room. So naturally, as he spun around the chair to check, he expected to see Tina, who must have leaned in and switched the light off, maybe thinking he wasn't in or something. But there was someone standing in the doorway, and it wasn't Tina. It was a woman, small in stature, smaller than Tina anyway. Only this woman looked grey. Keith could barely believe what he was seeing. The lady wasn't looking at him, by the way. She was actually turned sideways. But make no mistake, this was no shadow, no trick of the light. He could see her as plain as day. She was lit by the light of the hallway. Her hair was shoulder length. She was thin and spindly looking, frail. She was wearing a dress, though Keith told me that it could have been a robe. But still, she seemed grey. Now, what was this woman doing in the doorway? Well, it appeared like she was confused, as if she was stuck in that doorway. Keith saw all of this for a few seconds, and despite his shock, he decided he wanted to look closer. He leapt up from his desk and quickly hurried to the doorway. But she seemed to vanish as he reached it. Only she didn't fully vanish, because even though the hallway was empty, when he stepped into the hallway, he saw the woman in the corridor darting around the corner as if she was running away from him. He raced after the figure, but it was gone, and he ended up in the bathroom where Tina was still in the bath, and he could see that she was under those bubbles. There was just no way she could have gotten up and turned off the office light and ran away, and besides, it looked nothing like her anyway. Tina saw his face, and she was afraid. She said, "What's wrong?" And he told her as plain as he could. He said, I think I've just seen a ghost." Keith said he had a sense that this lady wanted to be seen. After all, she somehow flicked on the light, which was the only reason Keith turned from his computer to look at her. Now, you might assume that they would have left the house maybe by now, but you'd be surprised how many people stick around during hauntings, even when they get very intense. Some people can't face the upheaval of another move so soon after moving in. Others need more time to see if it's just their imaginations. Others are intrigued as well as being frightened. Or some are brave and more courageous than others. I spoke to some of the paranormal investigators who were involved and spoke to Keith, and one of them in particular was talking about the courage he saw in Keith. In other words, it's not implausible to me when people stay in a house that has activity like this. But soon, it wouldn't just be Keith or Tina who witnessed the paranormal, because they're friends. They were about to see things too at the housewarming party. A few months after moving into the Bothell house, Keith and Tina's friends were asking when they were going to throw a housewarming party. Now, the couple had wanted to do that. They wanted to throw a party, but they hadn't due to the weird stuff that was going on in the home. It just didn't really feel like the right time to invite people over. But the more their friends pushed for this party, the more open to the idea they became. They started to think, you know what, maybe this is exactly what this place needs, an influx of positive energy, of life. Well, they invited their friends to a get-together to celebrate the new house, and if they hoped it would be normal and uneventful, they were wrong. For example, Keith was cooking the party food out on the backyard patio. And whenever he went to check on the food at night, the door behind him would close and lock. No, this wasn't a window blowing shut in a night breeze. This was a sliding door. But that was nothing. You see, by the end of the night, every single guest said something strange had happened to them in the house. And not just strange, scary. Every woman who came to the party said they felt something tried to tug at their hair. Some of them even felt something shoving into their shoulder, as if a person was barging past them in the hallway and just knocking them out the way. And so despite the scariness of it, the friends agreed to stay and crack open some wine. If they just kept going with the party, maybe this grey lady, whoever it was, would realize that this was Keith and Tina's house now, and she would be on her way. Needless to say, their friends who had previously been skeptical and amused by their reports of a haunting were suddenly left with little other choice than to believe. Now, whether it was just because it was getting late or it was getting too freaky, I don't know, but various guests were leaving, grabbing their coats and just going, which meant a few friends stayed behind for a while at the end, and this is when the activity that night seemed to crank up a notch. Tina's best friend was called Kim. She was an employee at Microsoft at the time, and she was there with her godmother, who came from out of town. So Kim and her godmother stayed on at the party, and they were helping with the cleanup. But during that time, another potted plant went flying across the room, and this time it was witnessed fully by Kim. Not long after that, the loud banging began again. Now, Kim's godmother was a Christian, and so now she had seen actual paranormal activity at work in the house. She made an announcement. They should all gather in the room where the pot plant lay smashed on the floor, and they would pray. Now, Keith and Tina were open to this. They were very happy to do it because they both had a Christian tradition in their background. And so they did just that. They stood in the room and prayed, having absolutely no idea what was going on in the other room. You see, during this prayer session, they didn't see or hear anything out of the ordinary. Yet when they said amen and headed into the kitchen, they froze in their tracks. All the kitchen drawers and cupboard drawers were wide open. Kim's godmother had flown in from LA, but she was originally from New Orleans in Louisiana. She hadn't just heard of hauntings before, she had experienced some of them too. So it was rather disconcerting for Keith and Tina to see the look on her face when they left that night. Kim's godmother hugged them on the doorstep with an expression in her eyes that said, "This is not going to end well." From that point on, all through November and December of 2012, poltergeist activity continued. Door slams, disappearing objects, thrown objects, loud banging, weird electrical issues like cell batteries draining or TVs turning on and off by themselves. But not only that, they started to hear footsteps in the home. Everything seemed to be getting worse until something unexpected happened, something good. The activity, for some unknown reason, just came to an abrupt stop. The first half of 2013 saw no major activity in the house. That didn't mean that Keith and Tina felt totally chilled out there. They still had that sensation of something being in the home, of being watched. It just didn't seem to be performing any of its antics anymore. Well, as they reached the summer of 2013, Keith had a cool invitation. He was accepted to become a beta tester for the soon-to-be-released Xbox gaming console with first-generation Xbox Kinect. Now, I'm more of a PlayStation guy, but I do appreciate the Xbox Kinect was a really great bit of tech. It was a motion-sensing device made by Microsoft, and unlike traditional controllers, the Kinect would let users control games and apps with their body movements and gestures and voice commands, no controller required. It did this with a depth-sensing infrared camera, a microphone array, facial and skeletal recognition. And so Keith was gladly testing out the new system, having no idea that the Kinect cameras were picking up anomalies. Indeed, it was Microsoft and not Keith Linder who started to notice the strange events. Microsoft would visit Keith and Tina several times to observe their interactions with the new system. This real-world interaction would help the team learn about glitches or practical hurdles that needed addressing before it went to market. But during those times, the Microsoft engineers noticed something odd on Keith's Kinect system. The camera was picking up shadowy shapes in the room. This made no sense because the camera was saying that there were things in the room that clearly couldn't be seen by anyone else. This appeared like a serious glitch, and Keith told me that Microsoft almost postponed the official launch of the Kinect because they had to iron out these bugs. Now, this is quite a big claim, so I asked Keith if he had proof of Microsoft possibly delaying the launch of the Kinect due to these anomalies. He admitted that no, he didn't have written proof of that. That was just something said to him by one of the engineers, he said. But when I pressed Keith on at least proof of the visits, he was able to very quickly show me emails from Microsoft organizing the visits to his home to check the Kinect, to check the cameras. And as well as the Kinect issues, other electrical issues were happening. For example, the fire alarms in the house would suddenly just start ringing in the early hours of the morning. But as he and Tina frantically rushed through the house to try and find the fire, there were no flames to be found at all. And as freaky as this activity was, 2013 had been a quiet year on the whole, and maybe the couple had assumed that those early scary days in the house had gone. How wrong they were. Because when 2014 rolled around, the activity came back, only this time it was horrendous. Well, let me share how Keith describes it. 2014 was when, he says, the devil showed up. It was January the 2nd, 2014, when Keith had an accident. He was coming down the stairs of the Bothell House. He was on his way to refill his water glass. But as he came down the steps, he slipped and fell. It's actually shocking how much damage you can do to yourself in your own home. Please be careful on stairs. And in this fall, Keith fell and completely severed the patella tendon. This tendon connects the kneecap, the patella, with the shin bone, the tibia. Now, this is essential for straightening your leg and for walking, even just for standing. In fact, even just for holding your knee steady if you need it. It is a horrific injury that requires surgery to reattach the tendon, and recovery time is months. Well, Keith spent the first month of that time confined to the upstairs of his Bothell home because he was unable to walk down the staircase. Tina had to go to work, which left Keith alone in the house. And he felt vulnerable up there and scared, because not only was he coping with a debilitating injury, but as he sat there trapped in the upstairs rooms, he was hearing things in the house downstairs, like someone was rummaging around down there. You would hear footsteps moving around the house too. It sounded like someone was just, living in the house along with him, but Tina was at work. The sounds of the activity were so distinctive that at one point Keith pushed himself through the pane and limped into the hallway upstairs. And he called out, "Tina, is that you?" But there was no reply. Throughout this time of being trapped upstairs, he would also hear tapping noises from behind the headboard of his bed. This is a surprisingly common feature of poltergeist cases, tapping not only on walls but on headboards of beds. And he would also feel watched. As he lay there recovering, it was genuinely surreal and frightening. But he told me that the most heart-stopping moments of those days was sometimes when he would hear the footsteps downstairs start coming up the staircase. Only they didn't walk up the staircase. He would hear them frantically banging, like whoever it was running up there to find him. And what's more, he would have his room door open to the landing, and he would hear those footsteps pounding along the upstairs hallway and stop just shy of the doorway, like this thing was taunting him, daring him to come out here, hobble out here and confront me. It was horrible, and it went on for weeks. But it got worse, because one day he was lying half asleep in the master bedroom when he felt the bed shift. Something was getting into the bed with him. Now, it wasn't big, not big enough to be a person anyway, but it felt like a small cat or a dog jumped up on the mattress. If you've got pets, you know what it feels like. As small as they are, you do notice a bit of weight displacement when an animal jumps on your bed. He said that once he was on the bed, this invisible animal, if indeed that's what it was, would start slowly moving towards him along the bed. Your house is supposed to be a safe haven, isn't it, from the world? And perhaps the core of that haven is your bed, where you sleep and close your eyes and lie there vulnerable for 7 or 8 hours every night. So I can understand why Keith decided not to tell Tina about this development. Things seemed to have calmed down. She was thinking the house was normal, and it was just too disturbing to tell her about the bedroom things and the footsteps. Now, I've had a similar experience of something getting in bed with me when I was staying in a haunted New England mansion. And all I can say is I can confirm that the feeling it gives you is absolutely spine-tingling. Keith wondered if all of this could be his imagination. He was on some pretty heavy-duty meds with his knee injury, and so he thought, I must be hallucinating. Well, that theory quickly shriveled in light of what happened next. He and Tina were sleeping in bed one night when Keith was woken by some strange sounds and the feeling of something watching them both in bed. She was asleep, he was awake and feeling this, and he'd never felt claustrophobia before, even while trapped upstairs for all that time. But in this moment, he felt so hemmed in, like something was rushing at him like a freight train. Now, thankfully, at this point, he was able to move around a bit more, and so being desperate to escape the oppressive feeling of that room, he got up and he headed down the stairs. And when he got down there, he could feel a sense of presence in the room, like it was throbbing in the air. So he decided to try something. He would smudge the house. Smudging is a ritual practice that involves burning herbs, most commonly sage, but also cedar, sweetgrass, palo santo, to cleanse a space, an object, or a person of negative energy. In recent years, smudging has become popular in modern spiritual and paranormal circles. Keith had learned about this online and decided to try it. He found some sage in the fridge, and he turned on the oven and he started to dry that sage out. And once it was done, he was praying and moving it through the house, desperately hoping that Tina did not wake up and have to feel the awful presence pushing in on her like he was feeling in the house right now. After a pass through the home with the sage, he left it burning on a saucer. It looked completely safe. He put that saucer on a bookshelf in the hallway, and then he headed back up to bed, feeling a tiny bit better at the thought of the sage smoldering downstairs. His eyes had barely closed when he heard the bang, and it was colossal. Certainly loud enough for Tina to spring up from the bed, bleary-eyed and shocked. Now, previous bangs had been hard to locate in terms of sound, remember? But this one was crystal clear. Its origin was the bookshelf downstairs. They both got out of bed immediately and went down to investigate, and scattered on the floor was the smoldering sage leaves, and the saucer they had previously been sat on was in pieces, shattered. It's actually quite moving to see how Tina responded to this. She had thought this activity was behind them, and now it was back so clearly she didn't say a word. She just turned, went back up to the bedroom, and she broke down sobbing. Since those early experiences, both of them had been reading up on the paranormal, and they had read a theory somewhere that if a haunting or poltergeist starts in a home, then goes away, but returns, it would most certainly be 100 times worse. Was this just some sort of hyperbole or a kind of random theory they'd read on the internet? Well, I'm sure they wished it was. But as the weeks and months unfolded after that night, that concept, at least in this particular case, would be hammered home to them as true. The night of the sage happened around March or early April of 2014. From then on until December of 2014, they had activity just about every single day. Not just banging now, but doors in the house would slam shut. This was especially disturbing for Tina because it would almost always happen when she was taking a shower or in the bath. Now it wasn't even just plant pots being thrown around, but clothes, lamps, books, candles, chef's knives, coins, kitchen chairs, bar stools, an ironing board. Keith said that it was back all right, and it was as if they were making up for lost time. Now, you might ask if they involved religious leaders in this. They had done previously, but now, when Keith and Tina reached out to them for help, for some reason they didn't respond. For example, the Catholic Church did not seem to return their calls. Their friends contacted their own churches, but nothing seemed to work. Indeed, whenever they tried to get churches to help, the activity seemed to ramp up in the house. It was as if the thing in there was angry at their attempts to get outside support. All this activity was starting to put an extreme strain on their relationship. Keith said that the arguments would always be about the same sort of things, usually related to the house. Did you call the church today? It's your time to do the smudging today, you haven't done it. The negative energy of these growing conflicts seemed to fuel this eager presence in the home. For example, on one day, Keith and Tina had a huge bust-up about the house. Soon after that, they heard a loud explosion sound coming from the hallway. It sounded like something had just crashed into the home. Now, Keith was on his computer at the time upstairs, and after hearing the explosion sound, he rushed out of the office and was shocked at what was lying there in the hallway. He could barely believe what he was seeing. Their bedroom door was off its hinges and was just lying there, ripped away from the frame. By this time, they had started to invite paranormal teams to help them understand what was happening in the home. A team arrived just a few hours after that door incident. This is interesting. As soon as the team walked into the house, they were struck by a bizarre humming sound. It seemed to be vibrating through the house. And so the team quizzed Tina and Keith on that, saying, what is that sound? They both looked at them and said, what sound? We can't hear anything. And so the team took them out of the house onto the driveway and then took them back in the house. And that's when the couple noticed the hum too. The team also saw the door torn off its hinges lying there. They even spotted a strange white mist rising from the hallway floor. And they found shards of broken glass all over the place. Why? Because the house had ceiling lights protected by a porcelain-like dome on each one. On that Sunday, after that huge argument, every one of those domes had exploded. That night, after an exhausting day dealing with the house, Keith and Tina went to bed. And they quickly fell asleep. That sleep was shattered by the fire alarm going off. Keith confirmed to me the details of the time of that alarm. It was March 31st, 2014, 1:34 a.m. Now remember, this had happened before, back in 2013, when a fire alarm had gone off and they'd looked around and there was no fire. But this time was different. Because in the darkness, as they flicked their eyes open to this sound of the alarm, they saw that the walls of the bedroom were slightly glowing. They both sat up gasping and saw under the gap of the bedroom door, the bottom, he saw the flickering orange light of fire. Now, I'm no fire safety expert, but I'm pretty sure if the fire alarm goes off in the middle of the night and you see evidence of a fire on the other side of your bedroom door, you don't open it. You really should avoid that. The glow could be from flames or heavy smoke that is right outside in the hallway, and opening the door could sweep it into the room, make things much, much worse. But I do understand that in the moment, it is hard not to want to open up the door to check. That's what Keith did. He yanked the door open, and thankfully, there wasn't a huge inferno in the hallway, but there was a fire. He could see it on the floor just a few inches from their doorway. And this small fire was coming from a book. He told me that the atmosphere in that moment was incredibly eerie. The quiet, burning pages, the hallway illuminated with flames. And he reached towards the book with his right foot and he clipped the cover over so that it flipped over and closed. And this action snuffed the fire out. But it was only then that he realized what the book was. It was his book, his Bible, which had gone missing in 2012. In fact, he'd made a note of it going missing. It had vanished on October the 10th in 2012. Now, he had left that Bible on his bedside table before going to bed, and it just seemed to have been taken away in his sleep. He hadn't seen it since, and here it was over 2 years later, appearing. This was insane. Now that the fire was out, he leaned down, carefully picked up the book. Ashes were kind of fluttering out, but that's not what made him frown. It was a bulge in the book. It felt like something was inside it. And so he opened up the pages again, and sure enough, he saw within the mess of ashes was a cross, a wooden Christian cross. He recognized it straight away because he bought this cross from Amazon. And yet here it was, looking warped and ruined. Keith told me how this made him feel. This man, noted for his bravery by some of those investigators, had one simple word: frightened. This moment made him frightened. But there was so much more to come. It was now the spring of 2014, and Keith had begun to install cameras in the house to try and capture the activity. And he and Tina were also online a lot, trying to learn more about the world of haunted houses. It wasn't a topic they had known much about before. Well, Keith was sitting at the desk in his home office researching poltergeists when he heard a sound from the master bedroom. They had a TV in there and it had just flicked on, which is odd because Tina was downstairs at the time. But hey, these things can happen, so he headed into the room to check, and Tina was coming upstairs to see what the noise was. And they found the TV, their bedroom one, was on. It was showing a music channel. Katy Perry was on there performing her song Dark Horse. So he turned the channel to something else, a non-music channel. Then he turned it off and went back to the office. About 5 minutes later, the TV came back on a second time, only the TV had switched back to the music channel, and Katy Perry was singing Dark Horse again. Not only that, she was singing the same part of the song as before. Now, slow down a sec, right? Because this is strange on multiple levels. It's not just the TV turning on by itself, but it seemed to be turning channels independently too. But the craziest part is, why was it on the same part of the song? It's not like music channels play the same song in a loop. Yet 5 minutes had passed, and I checked the song length. It clocks in about 3 minutes 35. Considering it was already playing when he turned the TV off, and it was still playing 5 minutes later, well, either the presence in the house was a huge Katy Perry fan, or it wanted them to hear that song in particular, or rather that particular part of the song. Spooked, Keith yanked out the plug. At least that would stop it. And then he went straight on his computer to Google the lyrics of the section they kept hearing. And the words he found were these: "Are you ready for a perfect storm, a perfect storm? Because once you're mine, there's no going back." Just as you read them, the same part of the song filled the house again. The TV was back on, with no cord sticking in the outlet at all. The next day, Tina was home alone when she started to see the lights flickering, and when she looked up at the lights, the glass dome that they had replaced shattered once again, and the shards of glass fired towards her face. This was so shocking that Tina dropped everything she was doing. She ran out of the house to her car, and she just drove. She had no place in mind to go. She just needed to get away from the house. Once she was at a distance, Tina made some frantic phone calls to Keith to tell him about the exploding glass, but all of her calls went to voicemail. Yet when she saw Keith later, he showed her that he had no missed calls on his phone. He got home that night and he said the upstairs of the house was in a state like a bomb had gone off. The next morning was April 6th. It was a Sunday. And Keith woke up and went straight to his home office to fire up his computer. And on the way, he passed a bookshelf in the hallway. He spotted a Bible sitting on that shelf. Not the one that had gone missing and turned up burned the other day. This was an old Bible that he had kept since his college days, and it was lying there on the shelf. It was impossible to miss because he had kept this Bible out handy along with some candles and some sage, because he and Tina were still using those things to try and calm the house down. Yet about 3 minutes later, he had to pass back through the hallway and he noticed the bookshelf. The Bible was missing. Now, by this stage, they were so used to things vanishing that he said he didn't even bother looking for it. He just carried on with his day, though he admitted to me that it did make him feel nervous. It was almost as if, with the Bible going missing, it was like the presence had removed some of their armor, as it were, that it wanted them to feel vulnerable. Well, later that morning, he headed downstairs to refill his coffee. And there it was, the Bible, from upstairs. Only now it wasn't just lying on the counter. Like the one the other day, this one had been burned too. Now, he didn't see flames like he had with the first, but this time the damage was much worse. And these fires would intensify. For example, the morning of April 9th was quiet and pretty uneventful. No loud bangs, no slamming doors. Tina had already left for work, and only 5 minutes later, Keith stepped into the shower, yet as soon as the water hit him, he heard it. The fire alarms went off again, and he staggered out of the shower, dripping with water, and hurried along the hallway. And as soon as he reached the bedroom doorway, he felt something rushing by him. A presence, like wind that shouldn't be there. Now bear in mind, the fire alarm is still blaring all of this time. And as this was happening, he was standing in the hallway landing area, and from there, in this house, you're able to see down to the front door of the home. And his eyes bulged when he saw it. The front door suddenly swung open wide and then slammed shut again, hammering the frame with a crash. He clambered downstairs, trying to chase whatever had rushed out just now. With the fire alarm still piercing his ears, he grabbed the doorknob at the front door and he started to twist it, but the door wouldn't open. And panicked, he span around and started to attend to the first problem, which was looking for the fire. So he ran back upstairs, and that's when he saw it. The smoke was coming from his office. He rushed inside and saw the poster which was on his wall above his computer desk. Keith is a fan of the Final Fantasy video games, and so he had a Final Fantasy poster on his wall. That poster was on fire right now. And since he was already wrapped in a damp towel, he quickly tugged that away and slammed it against the poster. The flames hissed and smoldered beneath it and went out, though the alarm kept going. And now smoke was billowing, not only in that room, but it seemed to be spreading through the house, and he could smell the burning plastic from the poster. Keith was wise enough to know that it's often not the fire that kills people, it's the fumes, it is the smoke. So he knew he had to get out of the house now. Yet again, when he pulled at the front door, it would not budge. He told me that it felt sealed shut. Next thing he did was to grab a phone. He quickly dialed 911. He frantically told them his emergency.
911, what's your emergency, please?
But when they asked for his address, the line just filled with static. Sir, can you repeat that? You're breaking up. Keith kept trying to talk to the emergency services for about 4 times. But when the person on the line couldn't hear him, he just hung up, and he quickly called Tina instead. Thankfully, she answered. And in panic, he just said, "Get back to the house, get back. The house is under attack." He didn't wait for an answer. He hung up and then realized he needed to get out through the garage. That was a way out. And he was able to get out that way. And as the sky filled with the sounds of sirens, the Bothell Fire Department screeched down the street, and 30 seconds after them, Tina turned up. And Keith, sitting out there on the lawn, pointed to where the poster fire had been, which room it had been in. And they went up to check it out, and Tina rushed over to him. You could see it in his face, how this experience had been overwhelming. And Keith just broke down in tears out there, sobbing on the lawn, and she held him. The firemen rushed inside. The fire alarms finally stopped screaming. And then 5 firemen were standing in his office upstairs, examining the source of the flames. And they confirmed that the poster was indeed the epicenter of that fire. Yet none of them could figure out how a poster could burst into flames like that. There's no nearby wiring, no heat source. Nothing else around it looked damaged. These people had seen it all, but this, for them, well, they filed it under strange. And when the firemen came to talk to Keith and Tina about it, they asked if they had any idea how it had happened. Of course, they wanted to tell the truth straight out. "Oh, we have a poltergeist. We're living in a haunted house. This stuff's happening a lot," but neither of them said anything. Which is frustrating in one sense. Why not just get an expert opinion? And yet, when you think about it, would you find it easy to say something so outlandish, potentially laughable? Would you not worry that the fire department might think you were pranking them or wasting their time or making it up? I can understand why they chose to say, "No, we don't know why or how this happened." So now the fire was under control. The fire truck rolled out of their street and left Tina with Keith, wrapped in a wet blanket, feeling defeated, shaken, and overwhelmed. In late summer of 2014, a letter arrived at the house. It was sent to the correct address, but it wasn't the same name, not him or Tina. Curious about this, Keith decided to look up this female's name online. He hopped onto Facebook, found her name, and after a little digging, he could see that from her public pictures on her timeline, it was clear. She and her family had indeed lived in the Bothell House between 2008 and 2009. It felt a little weird to him, but he was desperate for answers, and so he sent this woman a friend request. He didn't really expect her to respond. I mean, he was a stranger after all. But he just sent her a private message, and he asked her, had her and her family ever experienced anything weird in the Bothell House? And he did not elaborate on what he meant by weird. He didn't want to lead her. To his surprise, she got back to him, and what she said sent shivers through her. She said that they would always close the kitchen cupboards at night, but in the morning, they would all be open. They said they had a nanny who worked in the house, and she reported hearing people walking when there was nobody there, footsteps. The woman's son had seen shadowy figures in the home, and she said that he still was seeing them out of the corner of his eye in the new place they were staying. She even said that on one occasion, this woman had stepped out of the back door while her daughter was inside the house, but suddenly that back door locked itself. It was the same place, I think, as what happened with the housewarming party when Keith was locked out. Only this time, she couldn't get back in, and that sent her into a panic because her daughter was inside the house and she was going near the hot stove. And for a while, this woman could not find her way back into the house. She was so panicked she had to pick up a rock and just threw it at the glass, broke the glass, got inside. She said her family was struck with a lot of heartache after that house, including family illnesses, divorce. She was even, listen to this, she was even attacked in the home by a sexual predator, a man who had gotten into the house, an intruder. And this man was tracked down by police 6 months later. She said that that house had done something to her. It hurled her into a depression that made her want to end things several times. And she said this to him: "I hate that house and what it did to my soul." This was horrifying. And what's more, according to the documents of the county sheriff's department, there really was official involvement during this time with this former resident when she lived at the house. Now, I've seen those documents. I'm not going to share them directly online here because, I have respect for privacy. The activity in the house just wouldn't let up. On July 1st, 2014, for example, Keith was at work when he got an email from his home security system. It said that motion had been detected in the home, but he logged into the cameras. Every log ended in a connection error. He tried again later that day, and the cameras were finally working, but he saw nothing unusual on them. Later, he headed home and was going to watch TV when he went into his office to find all of his belongings scattered on the floor. His printer, his speakers, his keyboard, everything was lying around everywhere. It was absolute chaos. But this time, there were also markings on the wall. And as crazy as it sounds, the markings looked like the numbers 6, 6, 6. He had bought more crucifixes to protect the house. He found them stabbed into the wall. He also saw 3 inverted crosses scrawled onto the wall. And this started to happen more and more, sometimes with a weird black tar substance. Could this be a demonic presence? Had the devil truly turned up? Or was it a trickster poltergeist trying to freak him out by making him think that? Well, the events even started to do something they had not done before. They spilled out beyond the house. You see, Keith would sometimes have to go away with work, and he would stay in hotels. And he normally loved those times because he could finally get a restful night's sleep. But he was at a hotel one night when the blanket he had over him in bed was suddenly yanked off. I don't mean slipped or slid off, I mean yanked hard. And he woke up with a jolt, but there was nobody there. But he did see the sheets strewn across the floor, as if whoever had just done that had got what they wanted, to scare him awake, and now they had discarded the sheet and left. The most worrying thing happened the next morning, though. He and Tina always kept their phones on and online overnight, in case they needed to call one another due to the house activities. But when he woke up that morning in the hotel, he grabbed his phone and he was shocked to see a whole slew of messages from Tina that had not come through in the night. And it was messages like, "Why are you not answering? Where are you? I need you." And each of these messages was saying more and more things going on in the house that night. She was facing slamming doors, loud banging, all sorts of things. Well, he called her immediately, but he couldn't get through. And he tried 10 times before she finally picked up. This idea of Keith not responding to text messages played on Tina's mind. She started to wonder if he might be having an affair. This was especially on her mind because women's jewelry began to appear in the house that didn't belong to her. But Keith said he had never seen her before either. The strain was getting heavy on them both, especially as this presence seemed deliberately vindictive. For example, Keith started to find family photographs, only his face would be burned out of them, like from his little brother's college graduation. Now, am I imagining this, or can you see almost two faces fragmented in this photograph, one on the left and a partial face on the right? Tell me if you see that. Keith was seeing shadowy figures too out of the corner of his eye. He attempted to draw what these things looked like, and these sketches might look rudimentary, but imagine seeing those for real in your own home. It would be frightening. There were more fires too. For example, on a Sunday morning, the fire alarms went off again. Both of Keith's computer monitors were found in flames. They had to throw the wet shower curtain and wet towels on top to douse them. But then Tina shrieked because there was something else on fire, the shirt that Keith was wearing. They tore the shirt off and threw it to the floor, putting out the flames, and it had these weird burned circles on it. At this stage, they had lost thousands of dollars from the damage this thing was causing. Others would say, just move out. But Keith felt this wouldn't solve his problem. What if it followed him or Tina? And if it didn't, who's to say the next tenants wouldn't suffer the same thing? And he kept picturing a young family moving into the home, a husband, wife, kids, and he just hated the idea of them facing this. Well, Halloween night of that year was particularly chaotic, with a whole series of markings being found on the wall, including strange figures only drawn upside down. Do any of you out there recognize this symbol? I'm unfamiliar with it, but perhaps you may have some information on what it represents. A few days later, he even found the words Die KL scrawled on the wall. He even found it written on every wall of his office, including the ceiling. The kitchen bar stool had somehow gotten from downstairs up to his room. At the same time, he found his wooden crosses nailed to the wall, but nailed to pictures like this. He'd even find his clothes nailed to the wall. Well, the extreme nature of these events meant that a series of paranormal investigators came to the house, including the Travel Channel show Ghost Adventures. The Bothell Hell House gained national attention when it was featured in the popular show Ghost Adventures on February the 28th, 2015. The episode was called Demons in Seattle. Now, Keith did not contact the producers of Ghost Adventures. Rather, there is a Seattle reporter called Elia Jaffe who personally visited the house, and she had strange experiences there herself, and so she passed on the story to the team at Ghost Adventures. The show reached out to Keith Linder and Tina, and the couple agreed to let the TV crew investigate what had been happening in the home. And since there'd been so much activity witnessed by multiple people, they were confident that the crew would see things. During their investigation, the Ghost Adventures team spent approximately 5 hours in the house, but they reported no significant evidence of paranormal activity. And this lack of findings led to skepticism from viewers, with some accusing Keith and Tina of fabricating their experiences. Keith expressed disappointment with this episode, feeling that it had misrepresented their situation and subjected them to public ridicule. It must be pretty devastating to have your whole story ripped apart because nothing happened in a 5-hour stint with a TV crew. He also said that it was edited to make them look like they might have been faking it, despite there being so many other witnesses who confirmed it was not fake. Well, the stress of the Ghost Adventures fallout put even more strain on Keith and Tina's relationship. Now, of course, I wasn't present at Bothell when all this happened, so I can hardly guarantee the truth of Keith Linder's claims. But to be fair to him, he has tried very hard to counteract the negative press from that Ghost Adventures episode. Keith told me about the December issue of the Australian Journal of Parapsychology. A man called Rob Tilley, who is part of the Australian Institute of Parapsychology Research, said that this case is right up there with the most frightening of poltergeist cases: the Enfield poltergeist, the South Shields poltergeist, the Bridgeport, Connecticut case, and the Matthew Manning case, all well researched and detailed in various books and documentaries over the years. He says this: the Bothell Hell House is a major work, a turning point in poltergeist research. I got in touch with Rob Tilley to see if he could confirm this statement, and Rob emailed back very soon after saying he would absolutely confirm this, describing Keith as a very genuine and brave man. In the spring of 2015, a new paranormal team investigated the Bothell Hell House. Their investigation was extensive, including setting up continuous surveillance of the house via CCTV, not for 5 hours, but for 8 straight months. The team captured a series of unexplained activity, from loud bangs, phantom footsteps, electronic devices failing. Unexplained voices, popping sounds, screams, even apparition sightings. And this was enough to prompt 2 members of that team, Nicole Novell and Carissa Hartley, to come and stay in the house for 3.5 weeks. They arrived in late January 2016. The 2 women did indeed witness more activity, including shadow figures, and listen to this, the sound of a heartbeat coming from inside a bed.
I want to jump in about the Bible thing again, because it was getting late at night and the Bible pages were still moving on their own. So we had to shut the Bible to put it back on the table before we went to bed. It was like 3 a.m. And as soon as I shut the Bible, there was this loud boom in my bedroom.
Well, Nikki, what did you experience and were you able to capture during your week in the house?
My goodness. Okay. The house has its own vibration, if that makes sense. It's insane, the amount of sound. But also, the house seems to, and this is even weirder, I know, but it sounds like the house has a heartbeat. And
really?
Yes. And it's so weird.
Hear it all the time.
And yeah, it's weird. And, you know, the vibration of items like sitting on the bed, have your feet planted on the floor, all of a sudden, you start feeling just the mattress, okay, vibrating or pulsating like a pulse, like, you know, and it's, you know, how do you document that in order for anyone to understand what that feels like, you know, what that's like? That's hard, you know, I can't do that, you know, I don't have a tool that'll allow me to convey that to someone. I know when we were there, Keith, I think it was the first night, Keith goes, my bed's doing it. Come in, put your hand on the bed, and you could feel what felt like a pulsating, like a heartbeat. It was just strange. It's strange. And there was nothing else causing it. Nothing.
By the fall of 2015, word of the Bothell Hell House had made its way across the Atlantic. That's when Steve Mera, a respected parapsychologist and the director of the scientific establishment of parapsychology in the UK, received an email from Keith Linder. Unlike previous encounters, Mera didn't rush in. Instead, he spent over 4 months interviewing Keith, conducting tests, and carefully evaluating the case. Keith wanted to point out that this was very different from the 10-minute vetting call he said he had from Ghost Adventures. But no, he got a full psychological and behavioral review, and that convinced Mera enough to want to come and do an in-person investigation. And so in January 2016, Mera and his chief assistant, Don Phillips, traveled to Bothell, Washington, and they lived in the house for 6 days. What they experienced matched previous claims. Phantom footsteps, doors opening on their own, unexplained voices, equipment malfunctioning, and also apporting, the unexplained appearance of objects and the movement of them. Steve Mera and his team did geological surveys of the area to look for natural phenomena that might cause the strange activity in the home, and yet everything was discovered to be quite normal. But Mera was still puzzled that such events would happen in a house that was only about 10 years old during the phenomena. He wondered what must have been on the land before it. And so he and the team researched all 70 houses on that estate, and they discovered something quite startling. There was only one house that had been built on a pre-existing dwelling. That was this wooden log cabin. And that is exactly where Keith's house was built. But it wasn't over, you see, because when the activity escalated, Keith asked that same team to return. And this time Mera brought in Nick Kyle, the then president of the Society for Psychical Research in Scotland. He came as a neutral party, someone to evaluate the investigation with a critical eye. In April 2016, Mera, Phillips, and Kyle lived in the house for another 7 days, bringing the total to 13 days of investigation. And what they captured was fascinating.
Having seen their scientific methods, are you in the belief that what they have obtained is credible?
Yes, in most cases. Some phenomena have happened when we've not been expecting it, so maybe one of us is sleeping, but generally speaking they tell it like it is, and I would be able to say for certain phenomena that have been captured, as it were, yeah, I was there, and the way they're telling it is how it happened.
Nick Kyle said that he had certainly experienced paranormality in that house, without any evidence of fraud. The evidence collected by both the UK and US teams, along with Keith's written, audio, and video diaries, have led some investigators to consider the Bothell case to be one of the most thoroughly documented poltergeist cases in modern history. And yet, because of that episode of Ghost Adventures, for many, they have dismissed it and not looked into it into much depth. Steve Mera and Don Phillips concluded that the house was the site of a, quote, intelligent haunting, and they issued an official certification to that effect. Well, to date, over 7 books have been written about the events at the Bothell Hell House, including 3 by Keith himself. Both Nicole Novell's US team and Steve Mera's UK team witnessed firsthand what Keith and Tina had long been reporting. Friends who visited the house did too, and everyone seemed to walk away with their own story. And with so much validation from experts, Keith decided he wanted to dig into the past occupants of the house a little bit more. And he spoke to that previous occupant who had lived in the home from 2008 to 2009, the one who had previously confirmed the strange activity. And tragically, he learned that by then she had died at her own hand in 2016. And before her passing, she had told Keith that she was still hearing voices and that her children were still seeing things. And she believed her depression began in the Bothell house, but it ended in Montana. And there was more strain on Keith and Tina's relationship that it broke down. And when the house started to show signs of becoming more and more active again, Keith made a final necessary decision. He moved out. After 4 long years, though, just as he predicted, he did not feel like he had left the presence behind. The looming shape of the Bothell Hell House still cast its shadows across his life. So what are your thoughts on the Bothell Hell House? Maybe you think this really was just a house, nothing more, just wood, brick, wires, and walls. But if we do take the evidence of the investigators at face value, then ask yourself this. How do walls learn to knock themselves? How does wood learn to burn in symbols? How does silence learn how to speak? Whatever was in that house, it didn't just scare Keith and Tina, it studied them, it tested them, and it even sang to them. From a TV whispering a warning to them through the static. Are you ready for a perfect storm, Because once you're mine, there's no going back. I'm Peter Laws, and you have been watching Into the Fog. Good night.